What if I told you that one of the most powerful warriors in medieval history wasn't a king, but a teenage girl? A girl who claimed to hear the voice of God. A girl who led an army, defied monarchs, and changed the fate of France, only to be betrayed and burned alive by those she swore to protect. Today, we're uncovering the true story of Joan of Arc, the warrior who defied kings. Was she a divine messenger? A political pawn? Or the world's first modern revolutionary? Let's separate myth from truth and discover why her story still matters 600 years later. The 15th century. France is broken. For nearly 100 years, war rages with England. Cities fall, peasants starve, and faith falters. The rightful heir, Charles VII, hides in exile, a king without a crown. And then, from a small village called Domrémy, rises a voice no one expected. A teenage peasant girl claims to see visions, Saint Michael, Saint Catherine, and Saint Margaret, commanding her to drive out the English and crown the true king of France. Her name, Jeanne d'Arc, Joan of Arc. The story begins far from the glittering courts of kings in a small village surrounded by fields and forests, Domrémy, a quiet corner of France that most of the world have forgotten. It's the early 1400s, and the 100 Years' War has already bled generations dry. Villages like this live in constant fear, raids, famine, and whispers of English soldiers creeping through the night. Amid this chaos, a farmer's daughter named Jeanne, later known as Joan of Arc, tends sheep, helps her father in the fields, and spends her evenings praying in the dim light of the village church. She is just another peasant girl, one of thousands born into hardship, with no sign that history would ever remember her name. But something changes when Joan turns 13. She begins to hear what she describes as voices, soft at first, like the sound of wind moving through the trees. These voices, she says, come from God sent through his saints, Saint Michael, Saint Catherine, and Saint Margaret. They tell her she has been chosen for a divine mission, to save France, to drive out the English invaders, and to ensure that the rightful king, Charles VII, is crowned at Reims. At first, she keeps these visions to herself. Imagine it, a teenage girl in a world ruled by priests and soldiers daring to believe she has been selected by heaven. Her family dismisses her. The villagers whisper that she's strange, maybe even touched by madness. But Joan's conviction grows stronger. Every vision, every voice seems to fill her with purpose, with a courage that makes no sense for someone so young and so powerless. And yet, what is truly remarkable isn't that Joan claims to hear voices, it's what she decides to do about them. While others might hide or doubt, Joan believes. She takes these messages as truth, not delusion. She doesn't see herself as chosen for comfort or praise. She sees herself as a servant of destiny. She begins to pray more, fast more, and even make personal vows of chastity, dedicating her life to God. In this dark medieval world, women are expected to be silent, obedient, invisible, but Joan refuses to stay in her place. The voices keep telling her one thing: you must go to the Dauphin. Go to the man who would be king, Charles VII, and tell him that God has chosen you to lead France to victory. Now imagine what that means. A peasant girl who can't read or write, who owns nothing, who has never been beyond her village, decides she will travel hundreds of miles through war-torn land to speak to a king. It sounds insane, but for Joan it is divine command. And in her mind, disobedience to God is far worse than any human punishment. She starts by approaching the local commander in the nearby town of Vaucouleurs. Captain Robert de Baudricourt, a seasoned soldier, is used to dealing with desperate peasants, not prophets. When Joan appears before him, dressed in simple clothes, declaring she has been sent by God to lead France's army, he laughs in her face. He mocks her, tells her to go home to her mother, and sends her away. But Joan is not the kind to accept rejection. Days later, she returns. The commander is stunned to see her again, the same unshakable fire in her eyes. This time, she speaks not just with words, but with prophecy. She tells him that the French army will soon suffer a defeat near Orléans, and when it happens, he will understand that she speaks the truth. And then the news arrives, just as she foretold. Orléans is on the brink of collapse, French forces are faltering, and panic spreads across the land. The captain, now unsettled, begins to wonder if this strange young woman really is guided by something beyond comprehension. Joan's persistence, faith, and the sheer force of her presence begin to win over the hearts of those around her. People who once doubted start to see her not as a mad girl, but as a messenger. Even hardened soldiers, men who've seen death and despair, start to whisper that maybe, just maybe, God has not abandoned France after all. In every retelling of Joan's story, this is the moment that feels almost supernatural. How could one teenage girl command such attention, such authority, in an era when women were barely allowed to speak in public, let alone challenge generals and priests? It wasn't power she held, it was belief. Hers was a kind of faith that burned so brightly it forced others to see light in a world of shadows. She finally convinces the commander to grant her safe passage to Chinon, where the Dauphin hides, a perilous journey across enemy lands filled with spies, bandits, and patrols. Dressed in male soldiers' clothing to protect herself, Joan rides with a small escort, guided not by maps but by conviction. She says that her path is chosen, that God will lead her to the king, and she is right. The journey itself becomes legend. Every village she passes through seems to catch fire with new hope. People kneel as she rides by, touching the hem of her cloak, whispering prayers. Word spreads quickly, a maiden sent by God is coming to save France. By the time she nears Chinon, the story of the girl from Domrémy has become a rumor of resurrection, a tale whispered in taverns and churches alike. France, battered and humiliated, suddenly has something it hasn't had in decades: hope. But behind that growing legend is still a girl, not a queen, not a noble, not a general, just a teenager who believes that obedience to her visions is more important than her own safety. Every step she takes toward the Dauphiness court is an act of defiance against centuries of hierarchy. Every mile she rides is a challenge to kings, priests, and the very order of her world. Historians still debate what those voices truly were. Some say they were the product of faith and imagination. Others suggest they were symptoms of illness, stress, or spiritual ecstasy. But what cannot be debated is the result. Those visions set in motion one of the most extraordinary transformations in human history. A peasant girl, uneducated and unarmed, convinced men of war and scholars of God that she carried a divine purpose. And whether her voices were divine or human, whether they came from heaven or from the depths of her own mind, they gave birth to something greater. The unbreakable belief that destiny docenti belong only to kings, that even the forgotten can rise to change the fate of nations. When Joan finally reached the gates of Chinon in early 1429, she was no longer just a wandering peasant girl from Domrémy. She was a rumor wrapped in faith, a mystery carried on the wind. Her name had spread ahead of her like wildfire. People whispered that she had seen angels, that she could command armies, that she had been chosen by God himself. Yet, when she arrived at the castle where the Dauphin Charles hid, what awaited her was not welcome but skepticism. The court at Chinon was a world she had never known. Marble floors, silk robes, banners bearing royal crests, and a hall full of powerful men, each one certain that they, not some farm girl, understood the will of God. To them, Joan was an oddity, maybe even a danger. How could a girl, barely 17, claim to carry divine authority in a land governed by nobility and priests? But Joan wasn't there to impress them. She had come for one purpose: to deliver a message. The Dauphin, Charles VII, was not yet crowned. His claim to the French throne was fragile, his confidence weaker still. The English occupied much of northern France, and even his allies doubted whether he was truly destined to rule. To him, Joan's arrival was both curious and inconvenient. France was desperate for a miracle, yes, but a miracle wearing peasant shoes? That seemed too absurd even for desperate times. Still, curiosity won over caution. Charles agreed to see her, but not without a test. He ordered one of his courtiers to take his place on the throne, while he himself disguised as a simple nobleman, blending in among the crowd. If this girl truly spoke for God, she would have to recognize him without introduction. As Joan entered the grand hall, all eyes followed her. She walked slowly, her gaze calm, unafraid. The hall fell silent. Then, without hesitation, she turned away from the false king and walked directly to the disguised Dauphin. She bowed deeply and said, "Gentle Dauphin, I am sent by God to give you the kingdom of France." The hall erupted in gasps. No one had told her who or where the real Charles was. She had found him instantly. Charles was stunned. Whether it was divine guidance, intuition, or something else entirely, this girl had passed his first test, yet he was cautious. He brought theologians, bishops, and scholars to question her, hoping to expose her as a fraud. For days, they grilled her, asking about her visions, her faith, her purpose. She answered each question with composure beyond her years. When asked why she wore men's clothing, she said it was God's will to protect her among soldiers. When asked how she could claim divine instruction, she said, "God speaks to those who listen." Word of her conviction spread quickly. Soldiers began to gather outside the castle to catch a glimpse of her. Many had lost hope, their spirits broken after years of defeat. But when they saw Joan, something changed. Her presence seemed to ignite something deep within them, a memory of what it meant to believe. Even the skeptics found themselves wondering if this girl might be the answer to France's prayers. Charles, torn between fear and faith, sought further proof. He arranged a private meeting with Joan. In that meeting, according to accounts, she revealed to him a secret, something only he and God could have known. What she said no one else ever heard, but whatever it was, it changed him. When he emerged, his face was pale, his voice unsteady. He looked at her not as a peasant, not as a curiosity, but as someone carrying a truth too powerful to deny. From that moment, his doubts began to crumble. Joan told him, "You are the true heir of France. You will be crowned at Reims. God wills it." For a man who had lived his life haunted by uncertainty, those words were a weapon more powerful than any sword. But faith alone would not convince the kingdom. Joan still needed to prove she could deliver what she promised, victory. The royal council remained divided. Some called her a prophet, others a witch. The church demanded investigation. She was examined by a panel of theologians in Poitiers who found no evidence of heresy. Instead, they wrote that her words carried the mark of divine inspiration. It was a cautious blessing, but enough to sway the court. Charles granted her an army, small, underfunded, and skeptical, but it was a start. She was given armor, a sword, and a white banner bearing the names of Jesus and Mary, yet even now, the commanders questioned her authority. They had spent years fighting and losing. They couldn't imagine that a teenage girl who had never held a sword could lead them to victory. But Joan never claimed to be a soldier. She said she was a messenger. And messengers, she reminded them, don't need weapons, they need faith. Before setting out, Joan wrote a letter to the English, demanding that they withdraw peacefully. Her words were fearless: surrender to the maid sent by God or face his judgment on the battlefield. For the first time in years, France spoke not with fear, but with defiance. The Dauphin watched as Joan prepared to leave. To him, she was no longer the strange girl from Domrémy. She was something greater, a symbol of divine destiny in flesh and blood. Still, others plotted behind the scenes. Nobles resented her influence. Priests whispered about her audacity. But Joan paid no attention. Her focus was fixed on one goal, lifting the siege of Orléans, the heart of France's suffering. When she rode out from Chinon, the people gathered to watch. They saw not a peasant, not a soldier, but a vision of hope. Women wept. Men crossed themselves. Children shouted her name. The king's men looked on in disbelief. This girl, this untrained warrior, was riding out under the royal banner to face England's greatest army. What made her different wasn't her armor or her sword, but her spirit. Joan spoke to kings as if they were equals, not out of pride, but out of purpose. She believed she had been sent to remind them that crowns and castles mean nothing if the people have lost faith. To Charles, she became a mirror, showing him not just who he was, but who he could be. And as she rode away from Chinon, her mission now blessed by the crown, France felt something stir that had been dead for decades. For the first time in years, the dream of a united France, free, proud, and guided by faith, seemed possible again. And at the heart of that dream was a peasant girl who had looked into the eyes of kings and seen only men. When Joan of Arc rode toward Orléans in the spring of 1429, France was a land broken by despair. The English siege had strangled the city for months, cutting off food, hope, and the will to fight. Every messenger that came from Orléans brought only grim news, disease spreading through the streets, soldiers starving, citizens whispering that God had abandoned them. To the English, Orléans was the final key. If they could take it, the heart of France would collapse. But then came the rumor that spread faster than any army could march. A young woman, sent by heaven, was on her way to save them. Joan rode at the front of a small army of weary men. She wore white armor that gleamed even under the clouds, and in her hand she carried a banner, not a sword. The banner was painted with the names of Jesus and Mary, and when the soldiers looked at it, many said they felt their courage return. It wasn't magic or power that stirred them, it was belief. After years of defeat, they finally had someone to believe in. As they neared the city, English soldiers mocked them from their towers. To them, the idea that a teenage girl could turn the tide of war was laughable. "Go home, shepherdess," they shouted, "and tend your sheep." But Joan wasn't here to exchange words, she was here to fulfill her mission. Before she even entered the city, she demanded to lead a prayer with her men. She knelt in the mud, armor gleaming, lips whispering prayers of faith and fire. The men followed her lead, and for the first time in years, the French army bowed their heads not in fear, but in unity. That night, the people of Orléans opened their gates and welcomed her in. To them, she was not just a commander, she was a savior. Inside the city, Joan went straight to the walls, ignoring the protests of the generals. They warned her that the English fortifications were too strong, their cannons too deadly. But she answered, "The sooner we attack, the sooner God will grant us victory." Her confidence was absolute, and it spread through the ranks like wildfire. Soldiers who had been too afraid to fight now sharpened their weapons with purpose. Even the townsfolk took up arms, ready to defend their city beside her. Joan didn't just lead from behind lines. She walked the ramparts, comforting the wounded, encouraging the frightened, reminding everyone that God was with them. When a cannonball struck nearby, she didn't flinch. When arrows rained down, she lifted her banner higher. Her courage was not reckless, it was contagious. Men began to follow her not because she commanded them to, but because they wanted to. The French generals who had doubted her from the beginning found themselves forced to listen. She demanded an assault on the English strongholds surrounding the city. Against all military logic, they agreed. As dawn broke, Joan mounted her horse and rode to the front lines. Trumpets sounded, drums thundered, and the French charged with a cry that shook the air. What followed was chaos, smoke, fire, screams, and blood. Joan rode through it all, carrying her banner high, shouting encouragement as arrows whistled past. Soldiers later swore that she seemed untouchable, that even as death surrounded her, she moved like a figure lit from within. They said the English hesitated when they saw her, that their hands trembled, their aim faltered. The battle raged for hours. The French forces, inspired by her presence, fought harder than they ever had before. Each fortress fell one by one, the English retreating in disbelief. For every soldier who doubted her, there were now 10 who would follow her to the ends of the earth. But victory never comes without pain. During one of the final assaults, Joan was struck by an arrow that pierced her shoulder. The wound was deep, and blood soaked through her armor. Soldiers panicked, believing their miracle had fallen. But Joan, in agony, pulled the arrow out herself, mounted her horse again, and rode back into battle. The sight of her wounded but unyielding sent the French into a frenzy of courage. By nightfall, the English were in full retreat, leaving behind their dead, their weapons, and their pride. When the gates of Orléans opened the next morning, the bells rang through the city like thunder. For the first time in years, France had won. People wept, fell to their knees, and praised God for delivering them through the hand of a girl. Joan rode through the cheering crowds, her white banner fluttering above her, face streaked with dirt and blood, eyes filled not with triumph, but with quiet certainty. She had done what she was sent to do, and she knew this was only the beginning. Word of the victory spread across France faster than any messenger could ride. To the peasants, she was proof that heaven still watched over them. To the soldiers, she was the spirit of France made flesh. To the English, she was something far more terrifying, a symbol that their dominance could be broken. Everywhere she went after Orléans, Joan's legend grew. When she spoke, men listened. When she prayed, soldiers followed her example. Even the most cynical commanders began to believe that God's hand guided her every move. But Joan herself took no glory. She never claimed to be a saint or a hero. She said only that she was God's servant, sent to see France restored. Behind the victories and the celebrations, though, tension began to brew. Her success made her dangerous, not to the enemy, but to those within her own court. Nobles resented her growing influence. Priests worried about her divine claims, and some whispered that she was more witch than warrior. Yet none of that mattered to the soldiers who had seen her on the battlefield, standing unbroken amid fire and death. For France, the lifting of the siege of Orléans was more than a military triumph. It was a resurrection. The people who had given up hope found it again. The kingdom that had knelt in defeat now began to rise. Joan's victory changed the direction of the war, but even more, it changed the spirit of a nation. And for Joan, the voices that had guided her from Domrémy were still clear and constant. They told her that the mission was not yet complete. Orléans had been delivered, but France was not yet free. The true king had not yet been crowned. And so, with the same unshakable faith that had carried her through battle, Joan prepared to march again. This time, not just to fight, but to fulfill the prophecy that would define her destiny forever. The victory at Orléans had turned the tide of war, and Joan of Arc had become the beating heart of a reborn France. She was no longer just the Maid of Orléans. She was the living symbol of divine destiny, the voice that had brought courage back to a broken people. Everywhere she went, people knelt in the streets, reaching out to touch her banner or her armor, whispering prayers as if she were already a saint. Her victories carried the name of God, and for the first time in decades, the French dared to dream of freedom. But in the world of kings and crowns, faith and glory are dangerous currencies. And as Joan's star rose, so too did the jealousy, fear, and political games that would soon consume her. After Orléans, Joan pressed the Dauphin, Charles VII, to march toward Reims, the city of coronations. Her voices had been clear. France would be saved only when its true king was crowned there. The journey was perilous. Reims was deep in enemy territory, surrounded by English and Burgundian forces. But Joan's conviction burned brighter than any threat. She told Charles that God had already chosen his victory, if only he would act. And so, with hesitation but hope, he followed her lead. As the army advanced, city after city surrendered without a fight. French towns opened their gates to the girl who carried heaven's banner. The march to Reims became a pilgrimage of faith. On July 17, 1429, inside the cathedral that had once echoed with the voices of kings, Charles VII was crowned King of France. And standing beside him, in armor shining beneath the stained glass, was the peasant girl who had made it possible. When the crown touched his head, Joan knelt and said, "Gentle king, now is the will of God fulfilled." The crowd erupted in cheers, tears streaming down their faces. France had been reborn, but the triumph that should have united the kingdom began to divide it. In that moment of glory, Joan had fulfilled her divine mission, at least in her own eyes. Yet for the court around her, the maid's influence had grown too strong, too dangerous. Charles owed his crown to her, and that truth unsettled the nobles and churchmen who surrounded him. To them, she was not just a miracle, she was a reminder that power could come from somewhere higher than royal blood, and that frightened them more than the English ever could. Even as the cheers from Reims faded, political realities returned. Charles preferred peace and negotiation. Joan demanded action. She wanted to drive the English from all of France to finish what she had begun, but the king's advisors urged caution. They told him that the war had cost too much already, that diplomacy was safer. Joan argued with them, pleaded with him to strike while victory was near, but her words began to fall on deaf ears. In the months that followed, she led smaller campaigns, still guided by her voices, but without the full support of the crown. Her troops were underfunded, her supplies scarce, yet she refused to stop. In May 1430, near the town of Compiègne, she rode out once more, a young woman still believing that faith alone could conquer treachery. But this time, fate turned its back. During a skirmish with Burgundian forces allied with the English, Joan was thrown from her horse, surrounded, and captured. News of her capture spread quickly, and France fell into mourning. The English rejoiced. For them, this was more than a victory, it was vengeance. They hadn't just caught a soldier, they had captured a symbol, a living myth. But for Charles, the king she had crowned, her imprisonment brought no rescue. The court moved slowly, too slowly, as if paralyzed. Some say he feared provoking the English further, others that he simply wanted to distance himself from her divine claims now that his throne was secure. Whatever the reason, Joan's pleas went unanswered. She was sold to the English like property, a prize to be paraded. They wanted not only to destroy her body, but her legend. To crush the spirit she had ignited in France, they needed to prove she was no saint, only a heretic, a liar, a witch. The trial began in Rouen in 1431. It was not a trial of justice, but of power. 60 judges, priests, and scholars sat before her, all chosen by her enemies. Joan, 19 years old, stood before them in chains. The room was heavy with silence as they read the accusations: heresy, witchcraft, dressing like a man, claiming divine voices. Each word was a blade aimed at her soul. But instead of fear, she met them with fire. She answered every question with calm, with intelligence that shocked her accusers. They tried to trap her with doctrine, twisting her words, but she refused to yield. When asked if she believed she was in God's grace, she replied, "If I am not, may God put me there. If I am, may God keep me there." It was an answer so perfect, so unshakable, that the judges were left speechless. For months, they interrogated her, sometimes in public, often in secret. They demanded she renounce her voices, confess her sins, and accept the church's authority. But Joan knew their game. She told them that her voices came from God, not from the devil. She told them that what she had done in obedience to heaven. When they mocked her for wearing men's armor, she said it was protection, both physical and spiritual. To them, her defiance was proof of guilt. To those who would later read the transcripts, it was proof of extraordinary courage. But courage couldn't save her. The outcome was decided long before the first question was asked. Under pressure, after days of exhaustion and threats of torture, Joan signed a confession, renouncing her voices. They sentenced her to life imprisonment, but even then, her enemies were not satisfied. A few days later, she took back her confession, saying she had only signed it out of fear. The judges called it relapse, the gravest sin of all. On the morning of May 30th, 1431, the guards came for her. The people of Rouen gathered in the square, thousands of them, silent as she was led out in a rough gray gown. She carried a small wooden cross and asked for another to be held high so she could see it through the smoke. Witnesses said she looked up to heaven, whispering prayers as the firewood was stacked around her. The bishop read her sentence. The executioner hesitated. And then, with one torch, the flames were lit. The crowd wept as the fire rose. Some shouted prayers, others turned away. As the smoke swallowed her, Joan's last words were said to be the name of Jesus. Even her enemies were shaken. One English soldier fell to his knees, crying, "We have burned a saint." When the flames died, they burned her body twice more, scattering her ashes into the river so no relics could remain. They thought they had destroyed her forever, silenced her name, erased her from history. But even in that moment, the seed of her immortality was already taking root in the hearts of those who had seen her face the fire without fear, and in the memory of a nation that would never forget the girl who had defied king's armies and even death itself. The fire that took Joan of Arc's life in Rouen did not end her story. It began it. In the smoky silence that followed her execution, the world believed it had witnessed the death of a heretic, a warning to anyone who dared to claim divine power outside the church's control. But what no one in that square could have known was that the ashes they scattered into the river would drift far beyond that moment in history. They would become the foundation of a legend that refused to die. In the years after her death, France fell again into uncertainty. The English still occupied large parts of the kingdom, and many French hearts were heavy with guilt. Whispers spread that the trial had been unjust, that Joan had been condemned not by God's will but by the politics of men. Even those who had once doubted her began to feel the sting of shame. The soldiers who had fought beside her spoke of her courage, her compassion, her unshakable faith. They said that when she rode into battle, they saw light around her. They said that no one who looked into her eyes could doubt her truth. Then came the turning of the tide. Charles VII, the very king she had crowned, began to reclaim more of France. Victory after victory followed, and though Joan was gone, her spirit seemed to lead them still. Every banner raised in battle bore her memory. Every cry for freedom echoed her name. France's triumph became her unspoken vindication. It was as if the heavens themselves had finally answered her prayers. But the question remained: who had truly been guilty in Rouen, the Church, the English, or France itself for abandoning her? The truth began to resurface like an old wound. Decades later, Charles VII ordered an investigation into her trial, perhaps out of guilt, or perhaps because even kings knew that history would not forgive silence. Witnesses were called from all across France: soldiers, priests, villagers, even the men who had once accused her. What they revealed painted a very different picture from the one her enemies had written. The records showed manipulation, corruption, and fear. The judges who condemned her had been under English control. The evidence used against her was twisted, her answers misrepresented. It was not the trial of a witch, it was the assassination of innocence. And in 1456, 25 years after her death, Joan's verdict was officially overturned. She was declared innocent, her name cleared, her faith restored in the eyes of the world. The girl once branded a heretic was now recognized as a martyr. From that moment, her legend began to grow like wildfire. Stories spread through the countryside, tales of her bravery, her visions, her purity. Mothers told their daughters about the girl who had defied kings. Priests spoke of her in sermons as an example of unbreakable faith. Painters, poets, and playwrights began to immortalize her image. Some saw her as a saint, others as a symbol of France itself, the embodiment of courage against oppression. Centuries passed, but her voice never faded. During times of war and darkness, the French people would look to her story for strength. In the Revolution, her name was invoked as a cry for liberty. In the wars against foreign invasion, soldiers carried her image into battle. Joan had become something larger than one life. She had become the spirit of resilience itself. The Church, however, took much longer to accept what the people already believed. For nearly 500 years, Joan remained a figure between heaven and earth, too divine for history, too human for sainthood. But her influence never stopped growing. In 1909, Pope Pius X declared her blessed, and just 11 years later, in 1920, she was canonized as St. Joan of Arc. The same institution that once condemned her to the flames now raised her name among the saints. It was one of history's most powerful reversals. The heretic turned holy. When she was canonized, the ceremony drew thousands from across the world. French flags waved, choirs sang, and the air was filled with the echo of centuries-long redemption. Even in death, Joan had united her nation. The same France that had once betrayed her now celebrated her as its greatest daughter. Her story had come full circle, but her power continued to evolve. Through the 20th century, Joan became more than a saint. She became a symbol for everyone who had ever been silenced, dismissed, or broken by the weight of authority. Writers compared her to a phoenix, reborn from the ashes of her own execution. Feminists called her the first woman in history to command an army in a man's world. Patriots hailed her as the eternal guardian of France's soul. Artists painted her as both warrior and saint, her eyes filled with faith, her armor reflecting both glory and pain. In the centuries since her death, hundreds of plays, books, and films have been inspired by her story. Each retelling shapes her in new ways, sometimes as a visionary saint, sometimes as a tragic rebel, sometimes as a mirror for humanity's struggle between power and conscience. But no matter how the story is told, one truth remains constant: Joan of Arc was never ordinary. She broke the rules of her age, she defied kings and generals, and she followed her calling even when it led her to the flames. Her life forces us to confront a question that still burns today: how far would you go for what you believe in? Joan's faith was not gentle or passive. It was fierce, unyielding, and dangerous. She didn't wait for permission from kings or priests. She acted because she believed that divine truth demanded action. And that kind of belief, the kind that stands firm even in the face of death, is something the world rarely understands but never forgets. Even now, her image stands in cathedrals and city squares, sword in hand, eyes lifted toward heaven. She has become the bridge between the earthly and the divine, a reminder that one voice, if true enough, can outlast empires. In Domrémy, her birthplace, the fields she once walked are now sacred ground. In Orléans, the city she saved, every year the people still march in her honor, carrying banners that bear her name. Her story belongs to them, to France, and to anyone who has ever been told they are too small to make a difference. Joan of Arc's journey did not end at the stake. It began there. The flames that consumed her body only illuminated her purpose. Her enemies sought to erase her name, but instead they carved it into history. Her life remains proof that truth can survive betrayal, that courage can outshine fear, and that faith, no matter how impossible it seems, can move the course of nations. More than 5 centuries have passed since the fire at Rouen, and yet, Joan of Arc still stands untouched by time, unbroken by history. Her voice, once silenced by flames, continues to echo across generations. To this day, her story stirs the deepest corners of human emotion: faith, courage, sacrifice, rebellion, and redemption. But what is it about this young peasant girl from Domrémy that refuses to fade from the world's memory? Why does her spirit still burn so brightly centuries after her death? The truth lies in the power of what she represents. Joan was more than just a soldier or a saint. She was a symbol of something eternal, the triumph of conviction over doubt, the victory of faith over fear, and the rise of a single unshakable soul against the full weight of power. Her legacy has outgrown the medieval world that gave birth to her. She is no longer just France's heroine, she is humanity's timeless question. What would you dare to do if you truly believed you were right? When we look at her life, it's impossible not to see how extraordinary it truly was. Born into poverty, uneducated, and dismissed by her society, she should have been invisible. Yet she became the most influential figure of her time, leading armies, confronting kings, and shaping the destiny of a nation. Joan's story challenges everything we think we know about history and power. She reminds us that greatness does not come from birthright or wealth, it comes from purpose. Every era since her death has found new meaning in her. In the Renaissance, artists painted her as a divine messenger, a figure of holy light standing against the shadows of ignorance. During the Enlightenment, thinkers debated whether she was a mystic or a visionary genius ahead of her time. In the 19th century, when France was torn apart by wars and revolutions, Joan became a national icon, proof that courage and faith could rebuild a broken country. Even today, her image lives on not just in churches and monuments, but in the hearts of millions who see in her a reflection of their own struggles. She has become more than a historical figure, she's a mirror. To some, she is the voice of faith that stands firm when the world falls silent. To others, she is the symbol of rebellion, the one who dared to question authority and refused to bow. To many women, she is an inspiration, a reminder that strength, leadership, and destiny are not defined by gender, but by will. Her name crosses borders, religions, and cultures, uniting people who would otherwise share nothing in common. But Joan's legacy is not built only on victory, it's built on suffering. The fire that consumed her did more than take her life. It forged her immortality. It turned her story into something sacred, something that defies logic and time. Every generation that looks back on her sees a different reflection of their own world. During the 2 world wars, French soldiers marched under her image, believing she watched over them. In literature and film, her story has been retold countless times, each version shaped by the fears and hopes of its age. She remains a canvas upon which humanity paints its search for meaning. What makes Joan truly immortal is not that she was right, it's that she believed so completely that she was. Her certainty in her divine mission, her willingness to face ridicule, torture, and death, became a light that history cannot extinguish. Even her enemies, centuries later, came to respect her. The English chroniclers who once called her a witch would later write of her courage with awe. Her name, once used to terrify, became synonymous with honor. The irony of Joan's legacy is that those who condemned her ended up making her eternal. The flames meant to destroy her image only purified it. The church that once silenced her eventually sanctified her. The kings who doubted her were forgotten. The girl they burned became a saint whose name will be spoken until the end of time. In modern France, her presence is everywhere: statues in town squares, stained glass windows in cathedrals, her feast days celebrated each May. But even beyond France, her influence runs deep. In the United States, she is honored as a symbol of liberty and courage. In Japan, her life has inspired novels and art. In South America and Africa, her story is told in classrooms as a lesson in unbreakable faith. She has transcended history itself, becoming part of the collective human spirit. Joan's legacy also forces us to question the balance between divine calling and human will. Was she truly chosen by God, or was her faith so powerful that it created its own destiny? Historians still debate, theologians still ponder, and philosophers still write about her because she stands at the crossroads of mystery and truth. Her voices may have been divine or psychological, celestial or symbolic, but what matters most is that she listened when no one else would have dared to. When we speak her name today, we are not just remembering a saint or a warrior, we are remembering the fire of belief itself. The world has changed beyond recognition since her time, yet the human heart still wrestles with the same fears she faced: doubt, rejection, oppression, and the loneliness of conviction. Joan's life shows that even in a world ruled by cruelty and power, there will always be those who choose faith over fear, courage over silence, truth over safety. Her story also reminds us of the danger of misunderstanding greatness. Joan was condemned because she didn't fit the world's image of what holiness or heroism should look like. She was a woman in armor, a peasant giving orders to nobles, a believer who refused to let religion be used as a weapon. The same traits that made her powerful also made her dangerous to those who feared change. And yet, those very traits are what the world celebrates today. The voices that once accused her have long gone silent, but hers continues to speak, to question, to inspire, to awaken. In the end, Joan of Arc's immortality lies not in miracles or visions, but in the courage to live and die by her truth. Every time someone stands up for justice despite the odds, her flame flickers again. Every time a voice rises against tyranny, her spirit rides once more. Every act of faith, every defiance in the face of impossible odds, carries a whisper of her strength. The true power of her legacy is not that she changed history, it's that she continues to change it. She exists wherever there is struggle, wherever there is faith, wherever there is a soul that refuses to surrender. She lives in the prayers of the faithful, in the art of the inspired, in the courage of those who believe in something greater than themselves. The fire that once consumed her has never gone out. It burns now in every heart that dares to believe the impossible can still be done. Joan of Arc's story is not just a tale from the distant past. It is a mirror reflecting the timeless struggle between faith and doubt, courage and fear, destiny and sacrifice. From the quiet fields of Domrémy to the roaring flames of Rouen, her journey carried the heartbeat of a nation and the soul of humanity itself. She began as a humble peasant girl, unheard and unseen, yet through the power of belief, she rose to command kings, lead armies, and reshape the course of history. Her story is the proof that the strength of conviction can shake thrones, that the voice of truth can echo louder than the swords of empires. The fire that sought to destroy her only made her eternal. Through pain, betrayal, and death, Joan became something greater than legend. She became light. Even now, her spirit stands unbroken, riding through time as the eternal warrior of faith. She reminds us that real power is not found in crowns or armies, but in the heart that refuses to yield. Her courage challenges us to ask ourselves, when the world doubts you, will you still listen to your calling? When fear surrounds you, will you still raise your banner high? Joan of Arc's life may have ended in flame, but her legacy lives wherever there is hope, wherever there is resistance, wherever there is one voice brave enough to defy the darkness. She was the warrior who defied kings, the saint who transcended death, and the girl who taught the world that belief, when pure and uncheckable, can make even the impossible divine.